The National Cherry Festival has been an Upper Michigan tradition since 1925. The festival invokes memories of cherries, fudge, and northern Michigan summers. Along with all of these memories, one event is beloved more than most: the Cherry Festival Airshow. The festival brought more than 500,000 attendees in 2023, including aviators and their aircraft. Acts like the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds fill the skies with aerobatic moves, crisscrossing the Grand Traverse Bay. On July 3rd, 1998, one of these acts were Don Schaller and his Czech-built Aero L-39 Albatross. For all intended purposes, it was a routine flight on a visual flight rule evening in northern Michigan. However, that evening, Don, his passenger Don Rodriguez, and the Albatross departed Cherry Capital Airport out over Lake Michigan, never to be seen or heard from again. Welcome to Destination Aviation. Well, if you're listening, then you found yourself in the same curiosity mind that I did about aviation. As you probably saw from the description, my intention with this podcast is really to be, I guess, all-inclusive aviation. Stories, kind of weird. Who knows what happened? Airport stories, airlines, etc. So, as you saw, my name's Jeff. I have about 22 years of working experience in aviation, and I also am a private pilot and have 2 degrees in aviation. So, by no means do I claim to be an expert, but I have been fascinated with all things aviation, spent most of my adult life working in it, and enjoy the recreational aspects. I kind of started with this first story because I grew up in northern Michigan, and I remember this from a child seeing it on the news that the aircraft was missing. And actually, recently I found myself driving around Lake Michigan, and as I was going through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I remember thinking, I wonder if they ever found that Albatross. Is it still out there? Which started me digging into this story and then realizing kind of where it stands as of today and some of the things that have happened since it disappeared, and thought it would be a great way to kick off this podcast. So we're going to get a little bit of the details of what I could find from research online about this incident, and sit back, relax, and enjoy our journey. Who was Don Schaller? Well, we know he departed from Quincy, Illinois, to Traverse City, Michigan for the National Cherry Festival. From what we can tell in the NTSB report, he was an experienced pilot. But, Don being a successful businessman from Quincy, I think one of the harder parts that I had read is this actually was Don's wedding anniversary as well. So, survived by his wife. Not only does she have to look at Don's disappearance, but on what should be a joyous day. So, just really unfortunate event. On July 5th of 1998, 2 days after the Albatross and both Dons had gone missing, there was a report filed in the local newspaper. Basically read, the U.S. Coast Guard halted its search for 2 men aboard a privately owned military jet aircraft that disappeared while practicing for an air show in northern Michigan. The Michigan State Police today took over the effort, dispatching planes from the Civil Air Patrol to search a larger area for any sign of the aircraft. Coast Guard Lieutenant David Rabator said his agency's search of 2,300 square miles turned up no sign of the two-person training jet, the Czechoslovakian-built Aero L-39 Albatross. The jet's passenger is identified as Don Rodriguez, a flight instructor at Northern Michigan College in Traverse City. Rodriguez apparently was on board to help the visiting pilot navigate the area. Don Schaller of Red Star Squadron from Quincy, Illinois. Petty Officer Michael Farkas says the Coast Guard will resume the search if any debris is found or witness reports seeing a plane. We're waiting for something to indicate we should go back out there, Farkas said. Until then, we're not going to go back out and searching. The jet left the Traverse City practice area on Friday afternoon, but failed to return that evening. Its position was last recorded over Lake Michigan near South Fox Island. South Fox Island is actually a private has a private airport on it, a private land strip, and then the other half is owned by the Department of Natural Resources. So the island itself is pretty reclusive, and there's not too many people on it that would have been able to see anything the day that Don and Don were flying. Its last position was reported over Lake Michigan. Schaller was slated to fly with a Russian MiG M21 in the weekend performances over the National Cherry Festival. It's interesting with the media reports on this because from what I could tell, there was so much going on during that timeline, during the event, that if you look from July 3rd when the aircraft went missing to the first known article on it 2 days later, there was a lot of time where it just was unknown that this aircraft was missing. There were reports of debris near the Upper Peninsula of Michigan that visitors had spotted, but it had been determined by the Coast Guard to not be a factor in this disappearance. But it's interesting how long it actually took. I mean, today here in this age, it's pretty quick when we know that an aircraft is missing. But I do remember those first reports coming through of the aircraft when I grew up in northern Michigan at the time, and wondering where it was at. And I know people were talking as far south as South Haven or Sagatuck, Michigan, potentially that the aircraft would have gone that way. But I think, as you hear from this record, pretty much everybody's fixated on that area from Traverse City, Beaver Island, to Nobbin Way, UP to St. Ignace. So now that we fast forward into a couple decades later on the disappearance of this aircraft, there actually was an article written in 2019 talking about this disappearance. We'll go through a little bit of the facts here on what this article said. So on July 3rd, 1998, as we talked about earlier, Don of Quincy, Illinois was piloting his 2C Aero L-39 Albatross on a practice flight for the National Cherry Festival. Don's wife was quoted as saying, "I don't think there would have been anything keeping him from that ride." After taking off from the Cherry Capital Airport, Schaller guided his plane north, according to radar. Soon the craft was about 27 miles out and heading back towards the Cherry Capital Airport. The last radio transmission came in about 6 p.m. Flight controllers expected to hear Schaller again when he was about 5 miles out, but that call never came. The plane disappeared from radar. About 9 p.m., Coast Guard helicopters were dispatched from Traverse City to begin search. For the next few days, the copter crews equipped with night vision goggles scanned the waters of Lake Michigan. 30 cargo plane and Blue Angel C-130 dubbed Albert were accompanying in the search. A Coast Guard utility boat, along with airplanes, repeatedly searched the area between North Manitou and South Fox Islands, but there was no sign of the Albatross. No oil slick, no debris, no nothing. As we spoke about before, this search area covered some 1,900 square miles, and that part of all of Lake Michigan is vast. I think many people don't realize that haven't grown up in the Midwest, but especially in that northern part, from Beaver Island to Mackinac, Escanaba, there's not a lot on the land, and then there's not a lot out in the water. While it is a busy shipping lane down to Gary, Indiana, those boats are still sparsely when comparative to the overall search area. It was believed the Albatross was equipped with parachutes and ejection seats, but the Coast Guard officials said that the seats may not have been functioning, and it's unknown what kind of equipment was actually on the aircraft. At the time, Bob Buttleman was the director of North Michigan College's aviation program, which, as we talked about before, is where Don Rodriguez came from. Buttleman, as we referenced before, he was on the MiG-21 as a passenger, who was basically a cohort to what Rodriguez was doing in the Albatross. So it was a similar flight. They were doing the similar thing, kind of showing the navigation of the area for both pilots. Buttleman told reporters that if Rodriguez had crashed somewhere, he was alive. He was the kind of man who could survive. He was in the Air Force and the National Guard, Buttleman said. According to friends and family, Rodriguez loved all aspects of aviation, collecting all types of memorabilia, magazines, and even an L-46 J-3 Cub plane in which he first soloed. Rodriguez's son, Doug Rodriguez, was 16 years old when he soloed in the same aircraft. The 57-year-old flight instructor reportedly did have concerns about flying over open water. I think we all do. I live next to the Great Lakes. When I fly my aircraft, not only if you go for rental or if you're renting from a flight school, most have rules about flying over Lake Michigan. When I was working at one of the first airports that I had the pleasure of working at, which was Manistee, Michigan, a lot of people would come and go to Oshkosh, which is upon us here in the next week. Many would skirt along the shoreline, come up through Chicago over the Upper Peninsula, but some cut right just across Lake Michigan. But I know many pilots, and rightfully so, in a single-engine aircraft, there is a moment in time where you're not going to make it to either side. And the last thing any pilot wants to do is land in open water, as we all know. Rodriguez did have this concern, I think rightfully so, of flying over open water. He was also unable to swim, which I think led it to this. While teaching hundreds of NMC students over the years, he managed to log almost 10,000 flight hours, which, as we all know, is an immense amount of flight hours, showing not only that he's experienced, but probably the right person to have in the back when it comes to navigating the waters, coming to the area for someone for like an air show. Goes back into kind of what we talked about before. Because it was the Independence Day celebration, the story of the missing plane didn't hit the media until 2 days after its disappearance, which then it started to gain not only local attention but national attention. On July 9th, this is when the Michigan State Police called off the search. The Albatross MiG-21 in the air show was owned by Air USA, which was based out of Quincy, Illinois, which is where Don Schaller was from. So the MiG-21 that was supposed to fly with the Albatross was also owned by Air USA, based out of Quincy, Illinois. Both planes were used numerous air shows and military training exercises across the U.S. The company's president, Don Curlin, speculated at the time that the incident might have been a bird strike and it disabled the engine of the L-39. He was quoted as saying a large enough bird ingested into the engine can shut down the aircraft, and that's what he told reporters of the plane's disappearance. Schaller's wife, Christine Schaller, echoed that view, noting that the Air Force Thunderbirds had lost 2 engines for waterfowl in that same year. It could be that the plane had down by a bird in an upwind climb, she told reporters. The loss of the engine or electrical shutdown would have prevented any radio contact, from what she had said. Still hard to believe. We'll get a little bit further into that in the NTS report, that you would lose all electrical equipment from a bird strike or not able to get anything out to air traffic controllers. That is an interesting, to me, component to this, that, they're saying it would immediately affect everything in the aircraft. Searchers were held over water and air, and no records of the plane has ever turned up since 1998. Witness reports indicated that a man heard a plane going overhead, then a large explosion, when he described as being like fireworks, but never saw an actual aircraft. Over the past 2 decades, there has been other fruitless searches. In 1998, an underwater search using a side-scan sonar was conducted. A 30-foot-long object was found. Searchers at the time had thought it might be the aircraft, but it was confirmed actually just to be a rock formation. In 2008, another sonar search was conducted and found what could be a plane at a depth of more than 450 feet. It was near a boat that sank in the 1950s. Divers were sent down to confirm the identity of the boat and a possible aircraft, but the dive could not be completed due to the extreme depth. 15 years after the disappearance of her husband and the high school sweetheart, Christine Schaller, told reporters that she consoles herself knowing that her husband died doing what he loved. She believes that the plane will eventually be found, or at least part of the mystery will be solved. They tried to register all those things that go down in the lake, she said. It is interesting that you would see in 2008 this search that did not come to completion because of the extreme depth. 450 feet doesn't seem like much comparative to what we see divers and depths being happening in the oceans, but it's interesting that that actually never took place. The L-39 is a popular warbird. New versions are replacing older ones. Part of that aircraft, it was Eastern European for really training pilots in the case of defense, which is why it's become so popular in the U.S. for people that want to be able to use an aircraft of that style, whether it's for an air show like this or just for their own personal use. Thousands of the Albatross remain in active service throughout the world. In the United States, at least during this, their price tags were around $200,000 to $300,000, which I would have to look into that, because that seems pretty low to me for this type of aircraft, considering a new 172 is going to cost you more than that. Maybe I'll just get myself a fighter jet instead. But that actually seems to be off in this part. But as of this article, which would be 2019, there was 255 L-39s registered in the U.S. So some of the interesting things that I've been able to come across as I've been researching this, right, is the uniqueness of the aircraft, I think, right? You're looking at a fighter jet that's over Lake Michigan that's disappeared. And I think that one lends to the mystery of keeping this going until there's something found, obviously. But I think that adds to all the countless accidents that have happened in Lake Michigan, that this one's unique in the sense of, what type of aircraft it was, what they were doing. They were in contact with ATC, and the sudden shift to absolutely nothing, not finding a trace of it. It's all very interesting. As I was looking into it, one of the articles that I saw referenced the Lake Michigan Triangle, which I had actually not heard of this before. I did work on the Badger, the SSS Badger, the car ferry, which actually falls directly into this Lake Michigan Triangle. That's basically in the lower part of Lake Michigan. The ideology behind the triangle is similar to what you see in other locations, like more famously the Bermuda Triangle. Things like unidentified flying objects, unidentified submerged objects. The triangle stretches from Ludington to Manitowoc down to Benton Harbor and back to Ludington. The interesting thing about this being referenced is obviously from all the other reports, it's pretty well confirmed that the aircraft did not travel south. I guess never say never, but at least from what the experts are saying, it doesn't seem like that's the case. There was an interesting, I think, Unsolved Mysteries that I watched more recently. One of the newer ones on Netflix that I think it started out in season 2 talking about UFO. And I do actually think they referenced this area as the Lake Michigan Triangle, some of the weird stuff that's been seen. This is more of a, I guess they're taken as a serious report because it was from a National Weather Service observer in Muskegon, Michigan. But if you get some time, I would recommend, if you have Netflix or someone's passcode to Netflix, even though they're cracking down on that, to go take a look at that episode, because there is some interesting things in the Lake Michigan Triangle, maybe something worth doing a follow-up with down the road for us on. But in this case, I really don't see that the Albatross had anything to do with the Lake Michigan Triangle, if you will. But like I had seen in the other reports, it looks like it's fixated more in that northern part of Lake Michigan, from the Straits of Mackinac to maybe Escanaba to Beaver Island. And from growing up and seeing this on the news, that's what I remember at the time of them searching. So I guess it goes back to the old, okay, don't trust everything necessarily that you read on the internet. So what we're going to do here is go into the official NTSB report a little bit to see what that is. It is a full 5 pages long. So obviously this will take up at least a minute to get into here. But as most NTSB reports where there's no wreckage, there's just not a lot of content to put into one of these reports. So this is the official government report. I don't think we have mentioned this up to this point, but the registration on the Albatross was November 7868 Mike. They reference it as destroyed and injuries of 2 fatalities. This report, obviously, what we talked about, the date of July 3rd, 1998, at approximately 1845 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. So the analysis of the report, we'll just go through this. Which is a little more, I say, less of the personal side of it to just kind of the facts as the NTSB would know. The airplane took off at 1831. That's Eastern Daylight Time. At 1844, the tower controller asked the pilot of the airplane for the position report. He replied that he was 27 miles northeast of the airport, tracking at a 246-degree radial. As we know, this is Cherry Capital Airport in Traverse City, Michigan. Beautiful area, amazing area to fly to, going to places like Mackinac Island, Mackinac Bridge, over to Beaver Island. It's just an awesome place to get a nice VFR day and go flying, which this day was a VFR day that the Albatross went missing. The pilot told the tower that they would call him again when they were 5 miles out. The airplane was tracked by air traffic control radar, making a turn and tracking due west at 300 miles per hour. The airplane was tracked to a position of 344 degrees at 31.1 miles off Traverse City, VOR. Radar contact was lost as the airplane approached South Fox Island. I think it's probably wise to just pause here for a minute as we talk a little bit about what South Fox Island is, because I think it has a little bit of interesting history to it. So, South Fox Island is mostly uninhabited. It's, as referenced before, northern Michigan, out in Lake Michigan, north of Beaver Island. South Fox Island is a 13.89 square kilometer area, which is roughly 5.36 square miles. As of 2001, David Johnson owned about 2/3 of South Fox Island. The other third was owned by the state of Michigan, including 2 lighthouses on the southern tip of the island. There's no ferry service to South Fox Island, and no docks, fuel, or harbor. It does have the private airport, which we talked about, which is 5,500 feet long, which can accommodate jet traffic. This landing strip would have been there in 1998, which is another interesting point of, if it wasn't something that was catastrophic, if they were close enough to South Fox Island, you have Don Rodriguez, who knows the area, at that length of runway. That could have been a good area for them to divert to if they had the chance, which may go back to Don Shaller's wife's thought that it was something catastrophic that caused the aircraft to disappear, as we probably would know. Otherwise, there would have been a radio call or squawk or something to let air traffic controllers know where he was at. VFR sectional map, we have David Johnson's 5,000-foot runway on South Fox Island, which is a very nice runway for someone who uses that as a weekend getaway, or should I say vacation getaway. But nice runway. Obviously, in an emergency, we're just going to land right on that puppy if need be. But the North Fox Island has a smaller runway at 3,000 feet, and Beaver Island's right there, of course, which public use airport, service flying in and out. So, definitely plenty of opportunity for Mr. Schaller, Mr. Rodriguez to land, I think, if they were able to. But obviously something catastrophic did not allow that to happen. So we're back left off on the NTSB report. A search for the airplane was initiated at 20:57 Eastern Daylight Time. So right at about 8:57. So roughly about an hour and a half to 2 hours after Don had gone missing in his Albatross. On July 4th, 1998, at 22:35, search operations were suspended. So they roughly ran about 2 days on the search for the aircraft in both Don and Don. So the probable cause and findings from the National Transportation Safety Board are undetermined. The factual information from the report says, we know they departed on 1998 at 18:45. The Albatross was operated by Don, who's a commercial pilot, was reported missing over Lake Michigan in the vicinity of northwest of Traverse City. Visual meteorological conditions prevailed at the time of the flight incident. The flight was being conducted under 14 CFR Part 91. There was no flight plan on file. The pilot and the pilot-rated passenger on board have not been found. The local flight departed from Cherry Capital Airport at 18:31. The airplane had been flown from Quincy, Illinois to Traverse City, Michigan earlier that day for the purpose of performing expedition flights for the National Cherry Festival Air Show, scheduled for July 4th to the 5th in 1998. A student at Northwestern Michigan College said that the airplane arrived at the Cherry Capital Airport around 17:10. That is probably one of our always favorite that we love at airports, plane spotters. They always are there to not only get us amazing shots, but, in unfortunate cases like this, be able to add some information. And especially an aircraft like this coming in, aviation enthusiasts would be out in drones to see that. Following its arrival, the aircraft was fueled with 183 gallons of Phillips 66 jet fuel. The director of aviation division for the Northwestern Michigan College said the college had worked with Cherry Festival coordinators for several years, housing visiting planes used in the air show. Because of this, arrangements were made so that he and the passenger of the missing airplane, an instructor pilot employed by the college, could ride along in the L-39C, and the MiG-21, also owned and operated by Air USA Incorporated. The witness said that he went up in the MiG-21, taking off around 1900 local time. The L-39C took off before him. When he got back at approximately 2100 hours, discovered that the L-39 was overdue to arrive back to the airport. The manager of the Cherry Capital Airport Air Traffic Control Tower said that the airplane took off at 1831 local, and at 1844, so, 1844, we're roughly, about 15 minutes into this flight, give or take. The tower control asked the pilot of the airplane for a position report. The pilot answered he was 27 miles northeast of the airport, tracking at a 246-degree radial. The pilot told the tower he would call them again within 5 miles of the airport. Shortly following the pilot's radio transmission, the airplane was tracked by Air Traffic Control Tower radar, making a turn and tracking due west 300 miles per hour. The airplane was tracked to a position off Traverse City VOR of 344 degrees at 31.1 miles. Radar contact lost as the airplane approached South Fox Island, TVC VOR 177 degree radial at 9.6 miles. 1 minute and 20 seconds after radar contact was lost, a fast-moving primary target was tracked to a position 9 miles north of South Fox Island. At 20:57 local, the U.S. Coast Guard initiated search and rescue operations for a missing airplane. So that's interesting. So if you took at that last primary target, which at 300 knots, they would be a fast-moving primary target, especially if something catastrophic happened, it would be a faster-moving primary target. This puts them 9 miles north of South Fox Island. U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Navy, and Canadian forces were used in the search, which is, I think, just shows, the great camaraderie that happens in this industry. Anybody that was available that day, that was there for the air show, that could help, did help. Which immediately getting up and seeing what you can find is one, extremely helpful in a case like this. I mean, obviously in this case, it didn't prove to be that they were able to find anything, but the fact that, people dropped what they were doing to go search, I think shows the camaraderie of this industry. So in the official report, they have it as 2,300 square nautical miles. As we saw in the others, we had 1,900, but roughly about the same. Approximately square miles of Lake Michigan extending from Frankfort, Michigan, north to the southern shoreline of Upper Peninsula, near Port Island, Michigan, was searched. So Frankfort, if you remember from our Bermuda Triangle of Lake Michigan, it went to Ludington, Michigan. So we're north of that point. So still not within that mysterious area to the south in Lake Michigan. The search included North and South Manitou Islands, Fox Island, Beaver Island, High Island, and Gull Island. On July 4th, 1998, at 22:35 local, search operations were suspended. The L-39 aircraft was manufactured by Air Vodochi Company in what is now the Czech Republic as of 1984. It was used primarily as a tandem-seat military jet training aircraft for former Warsaw Pact nations. The airplane was registered to Air USA on October 4th, 1995, operating under the registered number of November 7868 Mike. The airplane was issued a special airworthiness certificate, experimental category, on April 4th, 1998. The airplane was being used for exhibition purposes and was scheduled to appear in the air show through September 1998. So it had just received its certificate that year, which is interesting. Don had a total of 5,500 hours and 35 hours in the Albatross. So, a good amount of time for, especially considering they just got this permit. He must have been flying before they received that to actually use this in air shows. And of course, as we know, the Albatross itself was 40 hours since its last inspection. The total time in the airframe was 954 hours. So we have VFR conditions. We had scattered at 5,000 feet, overcast at 11,000, 10 knots of wind. Wind direction was at 40, so 40 degrees. Obviously, Cherry Capital Airport is a Class Delta airspace, and over the lake you'd have Minneapolis Center. Visibility was 10 miles, and the condition was day. So all in all, really nice day for flying. So I don't think, obviously, weather related. Wreckage and impact information, the assumption, right, the aircraft was destroyed with 2 fatalities. So what do we know, right? We know weather is probably not a factor. I mean, it was a really nice day. He was in contact with air traffic control. They had a pretty good idea when he was lost. So I think some of the mystery we see here, right, is it's a VFR day. The weather's not bad. Lake Michigan's not churned up. The search and rescue teams were able to get out quick and still could not find a trace of anything. So let's talk a little bit about the L-39 itself. We've mentioned, obviously, it's a high-performance jet trainer designed for and produced by Czechoslovakian. Really NATO-involved training, right, for that side of the world. The L-39 was designed during the 1960s. It was a successor for the L-29 Delphin. According to the Aviation Safety Network, there are 168 occurrences in the ASN safety database for the L-39 Albatross. Obviously, you look at a Cessna 172 or Cessna 150, those numbers seem pretty low. So looking at the ASN Aviation Safety Base, the L-39 Albatross has 168 occurrences. Could sound like a lot, but you look at a Cessna 172, you're literally thousands of incidents, accidents. It would be interesting to see if there are any known flaws within the aircraft. So the Albatross itself, it has a wingspan of 31 feet, 0.5 inches, length of 40 feet, 0.5 inches, a height of 15.5 inches. It has a maximum speed of 485 miles per hour at 19,600 feet, on a maximum speed at sea level of 435 miles per hour, with a ceiling of about 38,000 feet, and a fuel range of 528 miles or 995 miles with external tanks, which I do not believe this had on, at least from the pictures that I could find with Don's aircraft. So the interesting thing with, looking around, Quad Cities had a fatality accident. There was another one in Napa Valley with an Albatross. Looking through some of the reports, trying to find maybe if there's a defect. When the aircraft was initially developed, it was paused due to intake issues, but those were reported as being overcome. So, when you read the articles, you see a lot of wild reports about maybe Don had taken the aircraft and left and disappeared, and obviously these type of things and speculation are hurtful, not only to family members, but they are just pure speculation. And one would think if you were just going to disappear, you wouldn't take a college professor with you who you really have just met. So it takes us back to Occam's razor, which basically, right, you shouldn't stack a theory and overcomplicate it. But the simplest answer is probably the correct answer. And so in this case, right, and you look at a lot of the other accidents, high performance aircraft, military grade aircraft, they're coming onto the market for commercial, private use. This aircraft in itself was just registered for special use to be in air shows. So you're using a high complex piece of equipment. It's not unheard of in those instances to have issues when it comes to maneuverability, flight control. There were instances out there, obviously, of flame out, the aircraft shutting down, and those causing crashes. Now, whether that be pilot error, these aircraft are putting into these complex type of positions, air shows, they're putting them under strain. You do see a tendency in these scenarios to say, okay, that derives to probably the explanation that makes the most sense here. We know the weather was probably not a factor. Fueling was not a factor. They tested the fuel. Fuel seems fine. Something catastrophic must have happened to this aircraft as it departed Traverse City. Something so catastrophic that it meant that the crew could not radio back to ATC? Was the limits pushed and, both individuals became incapacitated? Would that have resulted in the straight down into Lake Michigan? You would have to think the impact would be very forceful to not have any sort of remnants on the surface. Kind of reminds me of Value Jet when it crashed into the Everglades. It basically was swallowed up, and really within even an hour, it was hard to tell that anything had even been disturbed. So in this instance, is that what happened here? And I think that's the unknown. It would be curious to be able to finally find the aircraft. I mean, been so long, there's probably would still remain a mystery of what actually happened to it. But, obviously if the aircraft's in pieces, if it's, not completely intact, then maybe that would signify that there was a breakup, obviously, in midair. The fact that so many questions remain around this as one of Lake Michigan's mysteries, right? There's so many of these situations out there where, people operating aircraft have just disappeared. And obviously for the family, finding the Albatross can bring closure to the situation. Hopefully this Albatross is found and can bring closure to the family. For us aviators that have interest, in this case and other cases, learning from experiences, understanding what happened, hopefully can prevent others from experiencing those in the future. I was up near Traverse City. Actually, when I went around Lake Michigan, it was during the Cherry Festival timeframe, which sparked then this podcast idea for myself. This being the first episode, this being something that's had sparked my curiosity into this. I do a lot of flying now around the Chicago area, so many days I'm overlooking Lake Michigan and wondering where this Albatross is. Human nature has driven to the unknown, to find the unknown, to understand the unknown. And this is one of those cases. What happened to the aircraft? Where's it at? And I'll put into the comments here a couple different pictures I was able to find, including one of the 9 miles from basically the area from North Fox Island where the last radar track was seen heading northbound. Just to get a general idea of where it was seen, at least last from air traffic controllers. You kind of see a straits there between Beaver Island and the North Fox Island region. But, as equipment has advanced, as our exploration of Lake Michigan continues, it will be curious to see someday if this aircraft is found. If not for our curiosity, for Don's family. Both Dons, that is. It's great to hear that Don Rodriguez's son is still flying, and this is not taken away from his love of that activity. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. As I am new to it, I'm sure I will get better. There's certain things that I want to do, like I said earlier on, highlighting things like airports, maybe some of the weird, quirky fascination stuff that happens there, maybe doing some stuff of recording flights to different areas, different airport experience of different things. This is, for me, all encompassing. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, I will see you down the runway. Thank you.